Before we get started with today's interview, just a quick reminder, click the thumbs up, make sure you subscribe, and ding the bell so that you don't miss any of the great interviews that we have coming up. Now, on to today's interview. It is my great pleasure today to welcome Keith Snell. Thank you so much for being here today and taking time to talk to us. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you so much. It's really my pleasure. Great to be here, Sam.
Excellent. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about your compositional journey. So I'm curious, do you come from a musical family?
Oh, yes. My mother was a piano teacher and pianist as well. So, I was literally born into it, When she was pregnant with me, she was playing concerts and practicing 4 to 6 hours a day. So, I literally was born into it. And she would put me in a playpen next to the piano so that she could practice, but that I'd be right there. But the funny story she has about that, and I think it shows that right from the start, I was destined to do what I do. She would hand me a telephone book, a phone book in the playpen. And she said, I would sit there and I would tear out one page at a time. Just rip it out and put it to side. She said it would occupy me for hours and she could practice. So anyway, yes. And of course, then, I always heard her teaching as well. And, in fact, when by the time I was in high school and I knew that, playing the piano and teaching piano was what I was going to do, I would always sit in the studio while she was teaching. I would be at a table saying I was doing my homework for school, but I was really listening to the teaching. And so that was a huge influence. And really, it's because of that I learned, because she taught everything. She taught from the very beginning to the advanced. A number of the local teachers would come to her for help as well, and that sort of thing. She was very good. And so I heard the whole gamut. And it was really how I got to have such a familiarity with the literature and that was out there. So anyway, she got me started teaching when I was about 15.
Oh, wow. So you've been doing this for a long time, and you were just completely immersed in that world.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
When did you start composing?
That's a really interesting question, because the funny thing is I don't really think of myself as a composer.
Oh, wow.
I know. That probably is a really weird thing to say. So the first memory I have, one of the first memories I have of I guess I did compose a bit as a teenager. It was terrible. It wasn't anything you would ever, no, it was nothing. Well, okay, I'll tell you a funny story. So one day I had thought, I was probably 13 or 14. And I was at the piano and I thought I had really composed the most lovely piece. And my mother had been out and she came in and I said, Mother, you've got to hear what I've written today. And I started playing it for her. And she said, Keith, that's the Un Sospiro by Liszt. You've just transposed it to E flat.
At least you were stealing from the best.
Well, but as far as I remember, much later on, sort of late 20s. And I would, it was because of teaching. Really, it's teaching that motivates it. And so I just thought, I thought about the music that's written for our students. And I would just sit down with pencil and paper. And I would just say, okay, I'm going to write an 8-bar piece and I'm going to practice. And I would just practice writing. I would practice writing antecedent consequent phrases so that's the first thing I can remember doing. But again, it was because I was wanting to learn how to write for students. So that's really where that started. And I just practiced it. Yeah.
Excellent.
A little time after that, when I was writing the theory books with Martha Ashley, she was such a brilliant musician. Just incredible. I miss her terribly. Wonderful teacher, wonderful piano teacher, but she was also an absolutely brilliant composition teacher. And I would just pick up little things from her about how she would teach composing. and that helped me a lot, her suggestions. So it just
Excellent.
kind of evolved from there.
What are some of the things that challenged you to become a better composer?
Gosh, that's a really loaded question. I think there are several angles to that. One really is my priorities in teaching and wanting to be able to write things that I felt were truly composed pieces of music, but that were accessible to students and enjoyable, hopefully, for students to play as well. So I think that was sort of the big challenge for me. I suppose the reason I don't think of myself as a composer is because it is always for students, and I don't have this driving need. I don't wake up in the morning thinking, "Oh, I've got to write something," just to write. And I don't feel like I have a particularly individual voice as a composer, but maybe no composer feels that way. I don't know. That's not really what I'm trying to do. I'm really trying to compose music that will be enjoyable and accessible for students, but that teachers will feel has real pedagogical value as well. That music that's teachable as well as playable, I guess I could say something like that.
Do you teach composition to your students?
The other times where I've brought in composition is with students who have rather poor reading skills, but love to improvise and or make up their own pieces. And I have found that a really great way of helping them get better with their reading skills is, let's write down your piece. And just the task of having to try to put those notes down on paper, is really, really helpful. So I have worked with, I had a student who came in and they were so proud of what they'd written, and they'd put it in 3/4. And I swear to God, it was in 4/4.
Yep.
There was suddenly a strong harmonic shift on every, on beat 2 and then on beat 3. And then, so anyway, so I the other times I've worked with composition with students is something that will help them improve other areas.
What are some of the biggest challenges that as someone who is an editor, as someone who is a composer, is facing today?
It's bridging that gap between, as I mentioned earlier, music that's actually composed, that has form and structure and motivic development, but finds a way to have a voice that will speak to a contemporary audience. I think it's very tricky. On the one hand, as music teachers, we do have to teach, in my opinion, we do have to teach the fundamentals of how music traditionally has been written for the last 300 years. Because you can't go away from something if you don't know where the something started. You can't understand Bartók or Prokofiev if you don't understand what they went away from to create a new style and a new voice. So we still have to understand that, a tonic dominant relationship, we still have to understand the keys that we're playing in and all of that, but to still find a sound and a voice that feels fresh and new, I think it's tricky. There's a lot of talk about, what popular music to teach. And when I say popular, I mean everything from show tunes to current, whatever's on the radio and that sort of thing. And, it's tricky because there's a lot of things that don't make that pedagogically sound to teach, So yeah. I think that's a challenge. And maybe that challenge has always been there. I don't know. Maybe there's always been popular music. It's not like that's a new creation. There's always been popular music. But finding a way for the music to be satisfying and fresh and contemporary while still being teachable in a way that we feel we're benefiting the student's education as well. You know, that sounds really like I want them to be in school and pedantic, but, you know.
No, but it's a good answer, because I think what you're talking about is really eating a healthy musical diet and exposing yourself to quality literature. It's a similar thing to what we eat or what we are working on when we read. My wife works with students. She's a reading teacher. And so it's like, well, yeah, you can read one of these like pop literature books every now and then. It's okay to have a brownie now and then, but it can't be a solid diet of brownies. So one of the things I also want to mention while we're talking today is, as a festival chair, the most common question that I get is teachers come to me and they have struggles picking choice repertoire. And it's got to be, once we get to the elementary one level, it's got to be by a foreign-born composer. And you have made a massive contribution that helps all of the teachers all across the U.S. And so if you're not aware of Keith Snell's repertoire books, I want to point these out to you. There are 11 levels of pieces, all almost exclusively by foreign-born composers. There are these books that have Baroque and classical repertoire in them. There are these books which have Romantic and 20th century. There are also an accompanying book of etudes, which I don't have to show today. And best of all, the fabulous and wonderful Diane Heidi recorded every single piece in these books. And those recordings are available on the CHOS website. Talk to us a little bit about how you went about selecting this. This is such a massive collection of pieces. This must have been like a life-altering undertaking to go through this.
As I mentioned earlier in our conversation, I heard repertoire at all levels for so many years before I, even started teaching at 15. I was so familiar with repertoire, a vast amount of repertoire. And then from the time I started teaching at 15 until I started putting those books together, I became familiar with all the, actually teaching all of this repertoire as well. So I came to those books with a vast awareness of the repertoire, and I had taught so much of it that it wasn't as daunting as you might think for me to make those choices, because they were already so much a part of my life and my teaching.
That is so fantastic. You are so perfectly and uniquely positioned to put together this collection. That is just awesome.
Yes, and that was what I felt. I just thought, I'm just going to take what I do and what I have found that works, and put that together. It's a real contrast to, fast forward many years when we put together the sight reading books, where I needed to do exactly the opposite and find music that we don't know. And so that, in a way, took a lot more investigation. I had to go through a lot more music by a lot of different composers and find music that I didn't know and that I hadn't taught and that I didn't think teachers would be very familiar with and that I wasn't familiar with. But with the repertoire books, it was really based on years and years of teaching experience.
And that is a perfect transition into the next thing I want to say. One of the questions that I read all the time on online piano teachers forums and that I get from colleagues is, how do you move away from lesson books? And lesson books have their purpose, and I'm not trying to say that there's anything wrong with them. But eventually we want our students to progress into playing lots of varied repertoire. And I think you have created such a beautiful ecosystem by which teachers can do that, because your series also features 11 levels of scale books, which are just outstanding, the sight reading books that you just mentioned, which continue to help students to build those great reading skills, and the fundamentals of piano theory that you wrote with Martha Ashley. So I just think these books are so outstanding, and they've formed the backbone of my teaching curriculum for years. And yes, I've taken time to branch out and explore other repertoire and other books, but I just find them to be so immensely helpful. Talk to us a little bit about how all of these things integrate for piano students.
So To be honest, I take different approaches with different students. And I think over the years, the products that I've created have to do with, oh, I wish it was just a little bit different for this student. you know? So the first thing that we, did were the 3-volume at each level series with the Baroque and Classical, the Romantic Century, and etudes. And I'm teaching out of these books. And it's great to have all the repertoire choices. And one of the reasons I wanted 3 books was I had a lot of students at that time. I was seeing at least 40 kids a week. And I didn't want everybody playing the same thing at the recital, right? So I wanted to have lots of choice. So that I could have for my own teaching day, I would have a variety of music. But, I soon started thinking, maybe it'd be nice to have it, in one book rather than spread across 3. So that's when we came out with the Essential Piano Repertoire series. I don't know if you've got any of those to flash, but right. So basically, it's sort of an all-in-one, but it doesn't have all of it. I went through for the essentials. I had to do 2 things. One, I had to get rid of all the Russian music. I don't know if you've noticed. There's no Russian music in there because copyright laws changed. So I had to omit all the Russian music. And then what I did was I chose the essential pieces, the pieces I never skip, right? And that's what went in the essentials. So it is an all-in-one, but it isn't everything from the other series, So that's how those came about. The theory books came about because when I was living in California, we have our particular state exams there. It's called the Certificate of Merit exams in California, which I had grown up doing, and my students all did, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it was for a 5-year period, I actually wrote the exams for the test. And Martha Ashley at that time was the chairperson for the Certificate of Merit for the state. That was when I got the idea about doing some theory books. And in my mind, I was just writing them for California. I was writing them for me, for my students. And, obviously they took on a life that was I didn't know that they would be received across the country. That was actually kind of a surprise to me. Because as I say, I was really just thinking about what we needed locally. So that's how that came about.
I am so grateful to you for your time and for sharing all of your thoughts and your wisdom. It has been so incredibly insightful and such a delight to connect with you. Thank you so much, Keith.
You're really welcome, Sam. I've enjoyed it too.